The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Professor David Chen stared at the whiteboard that had become his enemy. Numbers and symbols covered every inch of the white surface, but none of them made sense anymore. He rubbed his tired eyes and checked his watch. 3 in the morning. Again. David had always been good with math. Actually, he'd been great with it. That's how he ended up teaching calculus at one of the country's top universities. Students looked up to him. Other professors respected his work. He gave speeches about making education fair for everyone. But right now, none of that mattered, because this one problem was beating him. The proof he needed to solve wasn't just any math problem. It was the key to getting permanent job security at the university. Without it, all his years of hard work might mean nothing. The pressure was getting to him in ways he didn't expect. David picked up his coffee cup, but it was empty. He'd lost count of how many cups he'd had today. His hands shook slightly as he set it down. This wasn't like him. He was usually calm and confident in his classroom. Students often said he made even the hardest math concepts easy to understand. But this proof was different. Every approach he tried led to a dead end. Every formula he used seemed to mock him. He'd been working on it for 3 weeks now, staying late every night, coming in early every morning. His wife had stopped asking when he'd be home for dinner. The math building was quiet at this hour. Most professors had given up and gone home hours ago. The only sounds were the hum of the air conditioning and his own frustrated sighs. Sometimes, he heard the distant sound of a vacuum cleaner or footsteps in the hallway. The night cleaning crew was probably making their rounds. David walked to the window and looked out at the empty campus. Streetlights cast long shadows across the walkways where students would be rushing to class in just a few hours. He felt like a fraud standing there. How could he teach others when he couldn't solve this himself? His phone buzzed with a text from his department head asking about his progress. David stared at the message but didn't reply. What was he supposed to say? That despite all his education and experience, he was stumped by a problem that a graduate student had probably solved before? The truth was, David had always relied on being the smartest person in the room. In faculty meetings, he was the one others turned to for answers. In his classes, he could solve any problem a student brought him. His confidence came from his ability to understand things others couldn't. But this proof was humbling him in ways he wasn't prepared for. He'd tried every method he knew. He'd looked through research papers and textbooks. He'd even called colleagues. At other universities, though, he tried to make it sound casual, like he was just curious about their thoughts. Nothing worked. David turned back to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. Maybe if he started over from the beginning one more time. Maybe if he approached it from a completely different angle. Maybe if he just worked harder, stayed later, pushed himself more. He began writing equations again, his handwriting getting messier as his frustration grew. The marker squeaked against the board. Some of the earlier work was already starting to smudge where he'd accidentally brushed against it. As he worked, David's mind wandered to his reputation. He'd built his career on being reliable, on being the professor who could handle anything. His colleagues saw him as progressive and inclusive. He gave talks about breaking down barriers in education. He supported programs to help underrepresented students succeed in math and science. But underneath all of that, if he was really honest with himself, David knew he enjoyed being seen as brilliant. He liked when people looked to him for answers. He'd grown comfortable with being the expert, the one who knew things others didn't. This proof was threatening all of that. If he couldn't solve it, what did that say about him? If word got out that he was struggling with something this fundamental to his research, how would his colleagues see him? How would his students react if they knew their competent professor was falling apart over a math problem? The marker ran out of ink. David threw it in the trash harder than necessary and grabbed another one. The new marker squeaked even louder against the board. He was making mistakes now, simple errors that he'd catch his students making. His usually neat equations looked like a mess of crossed-out attempts and half-finished thoughts. 20 feet away, down the hall, Maya Johnson pushed. Her cleaning cart quietly passed another classroom. She'd been working the night shift in this building for 2 years now. It wasn't the job she'd dreamed of, but it paid the bills and let her take care of her daughter during the day. Maya had always been careful not to disturb the professors who worked late. She'd learned to move quietly, to clean around them without interrupting their important work. Most of them barely noticed her anyway. To them, she was just part of the background, like the furniture or the computers. But Maya noticed them. She noticed their habits, their struggles, their late-night frustrations. She'd seen professors throw papers in anger, heard them talking to themselves, watched them pace back and forth when they hit mental blocks. And sometimes, when they left. Their work on the boards, Maya noticed the math itself. She'd always been good with numbers, even as a kid. Math made sense to her in ways that surprised her teachers. She could see patterns others missed, find shortcuts others couldn't imagine. In high school, she'd been the best math student her small town had ever seen. College had been different. Financial aid covered most of her tuition, but life had other plans. When her mother got sick, Maya had to make choices. Family came first. Education could wait. Except it had been waiting for 8 years now. Maya approached Professor Chen's classroom and saw the light was still on. Through the small window in the door, she could see him standing at the whiteboard, completely absorbed in his work. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled. He looked like he'd been there for hours. She knocked gently on the doorframe to let him know she was there, then began cleaning the opposite side of the room. She'd learned that most professors preferred if she just worked around them quietly. Some would nod in acknowledgement, others acted like she was invisible. As Maya emptied the wastebasket near Professor Chen's desk, she couldn't help but glance at the whiteboard. Math had a way of catching her attention, even when she tried to ignore it. The equations covered nearly the entire surface, layer upon layer of attempts and revisions. Maya recognized what he was working on immediately. It was a complex proof, the kind that would challenge even experienced mathematicians. But as she looked closer, she could see where he was getting stuck. There was an assumption in his third step that was leading him down the wrong path every time. She finished cleaning the accessible parts of the room and moved toward the door. Professor Chen was still completely focused on his work, muttering to himself as he worked through another attempt. Maya paused at the doorway and looked back at the board one more time. She could solve it. She knew exactly how to fix the error that was tripping him up. But she also knew her place. She was the night janitor. He was the professor. That's how things worked. 3 nights later, David was back in his classroom, staring at the same whiteboard that had been haunting his dreams. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, and his usually perfect appearance was falling apart. His colleagues had started asking if he was feeling okay. His wife had threatened to hide his car keys if he didn't come home at a reasonable hour, but he couldn't stop. This proof had become more than just work. It had become personal. David had tried everything. He'd reorganized his approach, consulted different textbooks, even reached out to former professors. Nothing worked. Every path he took led to the same dead end. The harder he pushed, the more frustrated he became. Tonight felt different, though. He was angrier than usual. The department meeting earlier that day hadn't gone well. Other professors were making progress on their research while he was stuck on this one problem. He could see the doubt in their eyes when he gave vague updates about his work. Maya had noticed the professor's condition getting worse each night. She'd seen this pattern before with other faculty members. The pressure of academic life could break people in unexpected ways. She always felt bad for them, but she also knew to keep her distance when they got like this. Tonight, Maya was running behind schedule. Her daughter had been sick, and the babysitter had canceled at the last minute. Maya had to wait for her neighbor to get home before she could come to work. Now she was rushing to finish her cleaning duties before the morning shift started. She approached Professor Chen's classroom around 2 in the morning. Usually he was gone by this time, but the light was still on. Maya could hear him talking to himself inside, his voice getting louder and more frustrated. Maya knocked softly and waited for a response. When none came, she entered quietly and began cleaning the far side of the room. She could see Professor Chen at the whiteboard, erasing and rewriting the same equations over and over. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, throwing his marker down. None of this makes any sense. Maya continued cleaning, trying to stay invisible. She'd learned that when professors were this stressed, it was best to just do her job and leave them alone. But as she moved closer to empty the trash near his desk, she couldn't help but see the whiteboard clearly. There it was again. The same mistake in the third step that had been there for weeks. Maya had watched him repeat this error night after night. It was like watching someone try to open a door by pushing when they needed to pull. Maya finished emptying the trash and moved to clean the other side of the room. But as she walked past the whiteboard, she stopped. The mistake was so obvious to her, so simple to fix. Before she could stop herself, she reached for an eraser. "What are you doing?" David's voice cut through the silence like a knife. Maya froze, the eraser still in her hand. "I'm sorry, Professor, I was just cleaning the board," Maya said quietly, setting the eraser down. "Cleaning the board?" David turned around, his face red with exhaustion and anger. "You were about to erase my work." "No, sir, I was just what? Playing around with advanced mathematics?" David's voice was getting louder. "Do you have any idea how important this work is?" Maya stepped back, her cleaning supplies rattling on her cart. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb anything." But David wasn't listening. Weeks of frustration were pouring out of him, and Maya happened to be the target. "This isn't some game. This is serious academic research. I've been working on this for weeks. I understand, sir. I'll just finish cleaning and—" "No, you don't understand," David interrupted, moving closer. "You think because you can read numbers on a board you understand what's happening here? This is graduate-level mathematics. This is work that determines careers, that affects people's entire futures." Maya felt her heart racing, but she kept her voice calm. "I really was just trying to clean the board, Professor. I saw there was some erasing that needed to be done." "Some erasing?" David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You were about to destroy hours of work. Do you know what would happen if I lost this progress?" "I'm sorry," Maya said again, backing toward her cart. "I'll be more careful." David followed her, his frustration spilling over into something uglier. "Maybe you should focus on what you're actually paid to do. Empty the trash, mop the floors, clean the boards when they're supposed to be cleaned. Leave the thinking to people who actually know what they're doing." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She'd heard variations of this before from teachers who thought she didn't belong in advanced classes, from guidance counselors who suggested more practical career paths. But hearing it now, in this place where she'd once dreamed of belonging, hurt more than she expected. "I understand," Maya said softly, turning back to her cart. "Do you?" David was on a roll now, all his pent-up anger and insecurity pouring out. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you think you can just walk in here and mess around with complex proofs like they're simple addition problems." Maya stopped moving. Something in his tone, the assumption that she couldn't possibly understand what she was looking at, made her pause. "Professor," she said carefully, "there's an error in your third step." "What did you say?" Maya turned around slowly. David was staring at her with a mixture of disbelief and rage. "There's an error," she repeated quietly. "In your third step, you're treating the variable as a constant, but in this context, it needs to be—" "Stop!" David's voice was dangerous now. "Just stop right there. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but this ends now." "I'm not playing a game, I'm just saying—" "You're just saying nothing," David cut her off. "You're a janitor. You clean buildings. You don't solve mathematical proofs, and you certainly don't correct professors who have spent their entire careers studying this subject." Maya felt the familiar sting of being dismissed, of having her intelligence questioned because of assumptions people made about her. She looked at the whiteboard one more time, at the error that was so clear to her, at the solution that was just one small correction away. "I think I should go," she said finally. "Yes, you should. And next time, maybe remember what your job actually is." Maya began pushing her cart toward the door. As she reached the threshold, she turned back one more time. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "the proof is beautiful. It's just that one small step that's throwing everything off." David stared at her, speechless for a moment. Then his anger flared again. "I'm going to speak to your supervisor about this. This kind of behavior is completely inappropriate. You can't just come into academic spaces and pretend to understand work that's clearly beyond your comprehension." Maya nodded slowly. "I understand, Professor. I'll stay out of your way." She left the room, pushing her cart down the empty hallway. Behind her, she could hear David talking to himself again, his voice echoing in the silence. Maya continued her rounds, cleaning other classrooms with the mechanical efficiency that came from practice. But her mind kept going back to that whiteboard, to the simple correction that would unlock everything. She'd seen the solution so clearly. Just one small change and the professor's weeks of work would finally make sense. But that wasn't her place to say. It never had been. David woke up the next morning with a pounding headache and the bitter taste of regret in his mouth. He'd stayed in his office until nearly 4 a.m, still wrestling with the same proof that had been defeating him for weeks. But it wasn't the math keeping him awake now. It was the memory of what he'd said to the cleaning woman. He'd replayed the conversation over and over in his head. The way she'd quietly suggested there was an error. The way he'd exploded at her for daring to comment on his work. The look in her eyes when he'd told her to stay in her lane. David had always prided himself on being different from other professors. He supported diversity programs. He encouraged students from all backgrounds. He gave speeches about breaking down barriers in academia. But last night, under pressure, he'd become exactly the kind of person he claimed to oppose. The coffee in the faculty lounge tasted like cardboard, but David forced himself to drink it anyway. His colleague, Professor Rodriguez, sat down across from him with her usual morning stack of papers. "You look terrible," she said, not unkindly. "How late were you here last night?" "Too late," David muttered, staring into his coffee cup. "Still, working on that proof?" David nodded. He'd mentioned his research struggles to a few colleagues, though he'd tried to make it sound less desperate than it actually was. "Maybe you need fresh eyes on it," Professor Rodriguez suggested. "Sometimes when we're too close to a problem, we miss obvious solutions." David thought about the cleaning woman's words. "There's an error in your third step." How could she have possibly known that? He'd dismissed her comment as impossible. But now in the light of day, doubt was creeping in. "Helen," David said suddenly, using Professor Rodriguez's first name, "what do you know about the night cleaning staff?" Professor Rodriguez looked surprised by the question. "The cleaning crew? Not much. They do good work, I suppose." "Why?" "There was an incident last night. One of them interfered with my research." "Interfered? How?" David hesitated. How could he explain what had happened without sounding petty? "She was touching my whiteboard, acting like she understood the mathematics." Professor Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "That's odd. The night staff usually keeps to themselves. Did you report it?" "Not yet. I wanted to think about it first." "Well, if someone's overstepping boundaries, you should definitely speak to building services. They need to know if their employees aren't following protocol." David nodded, but something felt wrong about the whole situation. The woman hadn't seemed malicious or disrespectful. She'd seemed knowledgeable. Later that morning, David found himself in the department head's office. Dr. Patricia Williams had been running the mathematics department for nearly a decade. She was known for being fair but direct, and David respected her judgment. "I wanted to discuss an incident that happened last night," David began, settling into the chair across from her desk. Dr. Williams looked up from her computer. "What kind of incident?" David told her about finding the cleaning woman at his whiteboard, about her comment regarding his proof, about his response. As he spoke, he realized how his behavior sounded, and shame crept up his neck like a rash. "You said she suggested there was an error in your work?" Dr. Williams asked when he finished. "Yes, but obviously she couldn't have actually understood what she was looking at." Dr. Williams was quiet for a long moment. "What did this woman look like?" David described Maya as best he could remember. Tall, probably in her late 20s, confident despite the situation. Dr. Williams leaned back in her chair. "David, I think I know who you're talking about, and if I'm right, you may have made a significant mistake." "What do you mean?" The woman you described sounds like Maya Johnson. She works the night shift in our building. Okay, so you know her. That makes it easier to address the boundary issue. David, Dr. Williams said carefully, Maya Johnson isn't just a janitor. She's one of the most brilliant mathematics students I've ever encountered. David felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. What? She was a graduate student here until about 2 years ago. Top of her class, groundbreaking research, incredible potential. She was working on her doctorate in advanced mathematical theory. Was working on it, what happened? Life happened. Her mother got sick, needed full-time care. Maya couldn't afford to continue her studies while supporting her family. She took the night job here because it paid better than part-time work elsewhere. David's coffee cup slipped from his hands, spilling across Dr. Williams' desk. Neither of them moved to clean it up. You're telling me, David said slowly, that the woman I lectured about staying in her lane is a former PhD candidate in mathematics? Not just any PhD candidate. Maya was working on proofs that challenged some fundamental assumptions in the field. Her undergraduate thesis was published in 3 major journals. When she left the program, several professors tried to convince her to stay, offered to work around her schedule. David felt sick. Did she say why she wouldn't continue? Pride, mostly. Maya comes from a family where you take care of your own. She couldn't accept what felt like charity, even though the accommodations were offered because of her talent, not her circumstances. The office fell silent except for the sound of coffee dripping from the desk onto the floor. David stared at the growing puddle, thinking about everything he'd said the night before. Dr. Williams, he said finally, the proof I've been working on. Maya said there was an error in the 3rd step. Was there? David thought about it honestly, for the first time. He'd been so offended by her comment that he hadn't actually considered whether she might be right. I don't know. I was too angry to listen. Maybe you should find out. David spent the rest of the day in his office going over his proof with fresh eyes. He examined every step, every assumption, every calculation. When he reached the 3rd step, he stopped. There it was, clear as day once he was looking for it. He'd been treating a variable as a constant exactly as Maya had suggested. It was the kind of mistake that happens when you're tired and frustrated, the kind of error that can derail weeks of work. But more than that, David realized that once he corrected this error, the rest of the proof fell into place beautifully. The solution he'd been searching for was elegant and complete. Maya hadn't just spotted his mistake, she'd seen the path to the answer. David sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his realization. A woman with the knowledge and skill to solve his problem had been cleaning his office for months. She'd watched him struggle night after night with work she could have helped with. And when she finally tried to help, he'd humiliated her, he thought, about all the speeches he'd given about inclusion and opportunity. He thought about the diversity committees he'd served on, the programs he'd supported. None of it meant anything if he couldn't see brilliance when it was standing right in front of him. David looked at his phone. It was nearly 6 in the evening. Maya would be starting her shift soon, assuming she came back after last night. He wasn't sure she would. The department building felt different as David walked through it that evening. He noticed things he'd never paid attention to before. How clean everything was. How carefully maintained. Someone took pride in this work, even if it wasn't the work they'd chosen. David positioned himself near the main entrance, hoping to catch Maya when she arrived. He had no idea what he was going to say, but he knew he had to try to make things right. At 7:30, Maya walked through the door with her usual quiet confidence. When she saw David waiting, she stopped. "Professor Chen," she said politely, "is there something I can help you with?" David looked at her. This woman he'd dismissed so casually, and felt the full weight of his mistake. Maya looked at Professor Chen standing in the hallway, and every instinct told her to walk away. She'd dealt with people like him before. People who said the right things in public but showed their true colors when they thought no one important was watching. "Professor," she said carefully, "I need to get to work." "Wait," David said, stepping forward slightly. Please, I need to talk to you. Maya adjusted her grip on her cleaning supplies. If this is about last night, I already spoke to my supervisor. I'll make sure to stay out of your classroom when you're working. The words hit David like a slap. She'd already reported the incident, probably as a way to protect herself from further harassment. He realized he had no idea what consequences his outburst might have had for her job. Maya, he said, then stopped. I'm sorry. Is it okay if I call you Maya? She nodded slowly, surprised that he knew her name. Maya, I owe you an apology. A big one. Maya didn't respond immediately. She'd heard apologies before from people who got caught saying what they really thought. Usually they were more worried about how their words made them look than about the damage they'd caused. Professor, you don't need to apologize. You were working late. You were stressed. These things happen. No, David said firmly. They don't. Just happen. What I said to you was wrong. How I treated you was wrong. And I want you to know that I understand that now. Maya studied his face. He looked different than he had the night before. Less angry, more tired. But she'd learned not to trust appearances. I appreciate that, she said diplomatically. Now, if you'll excuse me. She started walking toward the elevator, but David followed. Maya, you were right about the proof. There was an error in the third step exactly where you said there was. Maya stopped walking. Oh. I fixed it this morning. The whole thing fell into place once I corrected that mistake. You solved in 30 seconds what I'd been struggling with for weeks. Maya turned around slowly. I wasn't trying to solve anything, Professor. I was just trying to clean the board. But you saw the error. Yes. And you knew how to fix it. Maya hesitated. Maybe. David realized he was still making her uncomfortable, still approaching this wrong. They were standing in a public hallway where anyone could overhear, and he was essentially cornering her after work. Could we sit down somewhere? He asked. Maybe the faculty lounge? I know this is awkward, but I think we need to have a real conversation. Maya looked around the empty hallway. Professor, I really don't think that's a good idea. You've been clear about what my role is here. I was wrong about your role. I was wrong about everything. What do you mean? David took a deep breath. I know who you are, Maya. Dr. Williams told me about your background, your research, why you left the program. Maya's entire body went rigid. She had no right to share that information. You're right. But I'm glad she did because it made me realize just how badly I messed up last night. Professor Chen, Maya said, her voice getting sharper. My past doesn't change anything about what happened. You didn't insult me because you thought I was uneducated. You insulted me because you saw a black woman with a mop and assumed you knew everything about what I was capable of. The truth of her words hit David like a physical blow. She was right. Even if she had been someone with no mathematical background at all, his response would have been wrong. The problem wasn't just that he'd misjudged her credentials. The problem was how quickly he'd dismissed her as a person worth listening to. You're absolutely right, he said quietly, and I don't know how to make that right. Maya looked at him for a long moment. You can't make it right, you can just do better next time. Is there going to be a next time? Are you going to keep working here? I need this job, Professor. I can't afford to quit over hurt feelings. David felt another wave of shame. Of course she couldn't just walk away. She had bills to pay, responsibilities he'd never had to consider. Maya, can I ask you something? What? Why didn't you say anything? About your background, I mean. Why? Didn't you tell me you were a graduate student? Maya laughed, but there was no humor in it. Tell you what, that I used to belong here, but now I clean the place? That I had to drop out because life got complicated? What exactly would that have accomplished? It might have made me listen. Professor, if the only reason you would listen to me is because I have a degree, then you're missing the point entirely. David stared at her, realizing she was right again. I'm not very good at this, am I? At what? At seeing people, really seeing them. Maya shifted her weight, glancing at the clock on the wall. Professor, I understand you're trying to make amends, but I really do need to get to work. Of course. I'm sorry for keeping you. Maya started walking toward the elevator again, but this time David didn't follow. As the elevator doors opened, she turned back. Professor Chen? Yes? The proof you're working on. It's part of a larger series, isn't it? Something about optimization in complex systems? David nodded, surprised by the specificity of her question. I worked on something similar in graduate school. If you're planning to extend the proof to multidimensional applications, you might want to consider a different approach for the boundary conditions. Before David could respond, the elevator doors closed. David stood in the empty hallway, replaying the conversation in his mind. Maya had just given him another crucial insight, even after everything he'd put her through. She could have walked. A way could have left him to struggle on his own. Instead, she'd offered help. Over the next few nights, David found himself staying late again, but for different reasons. He wasn't just working on his proof anymore. He was thinking about Maya, about the conversation they'd had, about all the assumptions he'd made without realizing it. He started paying attention to things he'd never noticed before. How the other faculty members interacted with the cleaning staff. How students talked about the cafeteria workers, the security guards, the maintenance crew. How easily intelligent people could become invisible if they weren't in the right clothes, in the right roles, saying the right things. Maya continued her work professionally, cleaning around David when necessary but keeping their interactions minimal. She was polite but distant, and David couldn't blame her for that. On Thursday night, David left a note on his whiteboard before going home. It was simple. Thank you for the insight about boundary conditions. You were right again. DC. The next morning, he found his response. Written in small, neat handwriting at the bottom of the board. There's a paper by Dr. Chen from MIT that addresses similar problems. Might be worth checking. MJ. David smiled for the first time in weeks. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was communication. It was a start. That afternoon, David knocked on Dr. Williams' office door. Patricia, he said, I need to ask you about something. About Maya Johnson and about second chances. Dr. Williams looked up from her computer as David entered her office. She could see the change in him immediately. The angry, frustrated man who had complained about the cleaning staff a week ago was gone. In his place sat someone who looked like he'd been doing some serious thinking. You wanted to talk about Maya Johnson, she said, gesturing for him to sit down. I want to make this right, David said without preamble. But I need to understand what that actually means. What do you think it means? David had spent days thinking about this question. I think it means more than just apologizing. I think it means actually changing something. Dr. Williams leaned back in her chair. What kind of change are you thinking? About? I want to help Maya finish her degree. I know the university has programs for non-traditional students, emergency funding, flexible scheduling. I want to help her access those resources. That's a nice thought, David. But Maya already knows about those programs. She chose not to use them. Because of pride? Because of practicality. Maya has a daughter to support. She can't afford to take on more debt for a degree that might not immediately improve her financial situation. And she can't risk losing steady income for the possibility of future opportunities. David felt frustrated. So we just let brilliant people slip through the cracks because the system doesn't work for them? Welcome to the real world of higher education, Dr. Williams said dryly. Maya isn't the first talented student we've lost to circumstances, and she won't be the last. But what if we could create something different? What if we could find a way for Maya to use her skills while still meeting her financial needs, Dr. Williams studied David's face. What are you proposing? I don't know yet. But there has to be something. Over the next 2 weeks, David threw himself into research of a different kind. Instead of mathematical proofs, he was studying university, policies, funding mechanisms, and program structures. He talked to colleagues in other departments, reached out to contacts at different schools, and spent hours reading about innovative approaches to education. Meanwhile, his interactions with Maya had settled into a cautious routine. They exchanged notes about mathematical problems, brief but respectful conversations that showed mutual respect for each other's insights. Maya remained guarded, but she was no longer actively avoiding him. One evening, David was working late when Maya came to clean his classroom. Instead of ignoring her as he used to or dominating the conversation as he had that terrible night, David simply said hello and continued with his work. "Professor," Maya said as she emptied the trash near his desk. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why are you still here so late? You solved the proof that was giving you trouble." David looked up from his papers. "I'm working on a different kind of problem now." "What kind?" David hesitated. He didn't want Maya to think he was trying to fix her life without her permission. "I'm trying to figure out how the university could do better. For people like you." Maya stopped cleaning and looked at him directly. "People like me?" "People with talent who get overlooked because they don't fit the typical pattern." Maya was quiet for a moment. "Professor Chen, can I tell you something?" "Please." "I don't need you to save me. I'm not a problem that needs solving." David felt his face flush. "I didn't mean—" "I know you didn't. But that's how it sounds. I made choices based on what was best for my family. I don't regret those choices, and I don't need anyone to feel sorry for me because of them." "You're right, I'm sorry." Maya finished emptying the trash and moved to clean the whiteboard. "But," she said without turning around, "if you really want to change how the university works, maybe start by changing how you see the people who work here." "What do you mean?" "Look around this building. Really look. You'll find intelligence in places you never expected. The security guard who reads philosophy books on his breaks, the cafeteria worker who speaks 4 languages, the maintenance supervisor, who has patents on 3 different inventions." David stared at her. "You're serious?" "Completely serious. This place is full of smart people doing jobs that pay the bills while they pursue other dreams, or support their families, or just try to get by. You want to make a difference? Stop assuming that job titles tell you everything about a person's capabilities." That night, David couldn't sleep. Maya's words kept echoing in his mind. The next day, he started paying attention in ways he never had before. He talked to James, the security guard, and learned about his passion for ancient history. He chatted with Linda in the cafeteria, who turned out to have a degree in chemistry but couldn't find work in her field. He met Tony from maintenance, who had designed several improvements to the building systems but never got credit for his innovations. David realized that Maya was right. The university was full of untapped talent, people whose intelligence was invisible to the faculty who walked past them every day. 2 months later, David presented a proposal to the faculty senate. He called it the Hidden Scholars Program. The idea was simple: create pathways for university employees to audit classes, participate in research projects, and earn credentials while maintaining their current employment. The program would pair interested employees with faculty mentors, provide flexible scheduling, and offer financial support for books and materials. Most importantly, it would recognize that intelligence and curiosity existed throughout the university community, not just in the traditional academic hierarchy. The proposal was met with skepticism at first. Some faculty members worried about maintaining academic standards. Others questioned whether people without traditional backgrounds could handle advanced coursework. But David had done his homework. He'd researched similar programs at other institutions, gathered data on success, rates, and prepared detailed answers to every objection. More importantly, he'd talked to employees throughout the university and found dozens of people interested in participating. Maya was not among them. When David approached her about the program, she listened politely but shook her head. "It's a good idea, Professor, but it's not for me." "Why not?" "Because I've already figured out how to use my skills in ways that work for my life. I tutor high school students on weekends. I help my daughter with her advanced math homework. I solve problems that interest me in my spare time. I don't need a degree to validate what I know." David was disappointed, but he was beginning to understand that Maya's choices were her own to make. "What if," he said carefully, "the program could benefit from your input? What if you could help design it? Make sure it actually serves people, instead of just making the university feel good about itself? Maya considered this. You want me to help create something I'm not planning to use? I want your expertise. You understand both sides of this better than anyone. 6 months later, the Hidden Scholars program launched with Maya Johnson as its first coordinator. She worked part-time in the program office, part-time continuing her cleaning duties and part-time finishing her own degree through a flexible program she'd helped design. David often saw her in the hallways, usually surrounded by employees eager to learn, faculty members interested in mentoring, or students surprised to discover that their math tutor worked nights cleaning their dormitory. The proof that had brought them together was published that year, with Maya listed as a contributor, but David was prouder of the program they'd built together, and the recognition that true intelligence could be found anywhere, if you just knew how to look. Maya's daughter started attending math camps at the university that summer. When people asked Maya what she did for work, she smiled and said, "I solve problems."